Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is my honor to welcome you to the November Interdisciplinary Education Grand Rounds. I'm Sarah Cable. As Sam mentioned, I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs. And the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs is housed in the Office of the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Faculty Development. Our office is charged with the development, implementation, operation, and evaluation of campus-wide interdisciplinary and interprofessional education requirements. We'll refer to this as IPE, the acronym for Interprofessional Education. We'll begin shortly, but first, a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation is being recorded. Please remember to mute your microphones and use the chat function to ask any questions of our panelists. We will also have time at the end for Q&A. I will be your Zoom facilitator today, so you may message me directly with any technical issues. And without any further ado, I'll hand it back over to Sam to begin our presentation.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. As I said earlier, this Grand Rounds will be covering identifying and combating burnout. And I am your host, Sam Swafford. And our panelists this evening are Gerry Ibay from the College of Public Health and Ashley Cheyney from the College of Medicine. So as we get started, the way this format will work is that we have some predetermined questions we will ask our panelists, and they'll have some time to respond. And then after we go through our list of questions, we will open it up to audience participation and Q&A. And at that point, I invite everyone to drop information into the chat and get to fully participate with our panelists. So right off the bat, how do you spot burnout?
Ashley, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. So happy to be here. Thank you for asking me. Ashley Cheyney, I'm education faculty in the Department of Physiology, and I teach a lot. And I think how I spot burnout, for one, is just fatigue, absolute fatigue. I find my mind is fatigued, my body is fatigued. I also get irritable. You could ask my husband about that. He can definitely tell when I get burned out, and he's like, "Oh, babe, you need a break," which is absolutely true. So fatigue and irritability are big ones for me. How about you, Gerry?
Similar. Well, and as I think about it, I can be kind of irritable generally, but it's like, my wife will point out when I'm irritable, like your spouse does. But when I can feel it myself, that's kind of when it's a level, when you're just like, wow, like you say something, you're like, okay, that was pretty rude. And so it's like just in your face. I think another way that I tend to spot burnout is whether it's in myself or somebody that I'm close with or one of my students. So, so I teach in the Department of Health Administration and Policy. So we have students who are doing health administration or policy, basically kind of the behind the scenes work to help our health systems and our clinicians. And so for myself and for my students, one of the things that I look for is, are they doing things that are not normal? So like, for instance, for me, I'm the kind of person who likes to meet with people all the time. I want to go, I want to go to places. I want to, like after our faculty meeting, I want to go grab lunch with everyone. And when I'm burnt out, I'm like, I'm just going to Zoom in today. It's good. And, it's now somebody else, if you're more introverted, maybe it's the opposite. It's like, well, actually, I don't want to take that time for my self-care. I just want to, maybe just sit in a room and let other people decide instead of me doing what I'm doing. So, when I sense that something seems a little bit off, that tends to be, maybe a little bit of a sign that something the stress level has reached a point of, past being something that you can address yourself or using your traditional methods.
Would either of you guys say that like having apathy for what you're doing on a day-to-day can be a sign of burnout?
100%. Yes. Apathy. I think that's a little past burnout for me. It's when I haven't taken care of myself and I feel very overwhelmed and I get apathetic when I don't do the things I know I need to do to prevent that burnout from happening. But that can definitely be a component for sure.
It's hard to figure out. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation. It's like, do you just give up and not care because you've had enough, or is it the opposite way? And I think they're intertwined. It doesn't always have to be where one comes before the other. If I think about a relationship, like some people, they get to a point in a relationship where they're like, I'm checked out, but I'm still here. Like, we're still having dinner for some reason, but I'm not even, involved anymore. On the other hand, you could have somebody who's like, like we're done, because I don't want to get to that point where I want to feel indifferent. So again, I think it comes down to how you internalize things. But yeah, I definitely think apathy, for me at least, it's something that's, when I feel like I'm not engaged anymore, or if I'm not as, if I really don't care what happens, that's a bad sign.
Absolutely. Okay, on to our next question. What would you two say is the first step in addressing burnout, either for yourselves or when you're looking out for a peer or a student?
You want to take this one first, Gerry?
Sure, I can start on this one. Okay, so one of the things that I at least like to do, and so Ashley had mentioned her husband, serving as a reflective mirror, as well as my wife doing the same. So I really do think the first step is just acknowledging that you something is off. Like, even for instance, my wife is traveling today, and she had this rental car nightmare. And so she literally just called me, and she's like, the purpose of this call is just to vent. I just need to tell you how terrible this situation was, because if I just kind of sit here in my own brain, it's just going to make it worse and worse and worse. And if I tell you, it's not going to make it any better, but at least she knows that there's somebody out there who's supporting her. And so, at least for me, when I'm feeling burnt out, even though sometimes I'm like, well, I don't want to burden somebody with, what's going on. And, it's not really their problem anyway. But I do think it's always helpful when, I have somebody, and it could be planned, right? It could be something where I say, let's have a talk because I want to share what's going on. Or it could just be, I have a regularly scheduled lunch with this person, and hey, you just happen to be the beneficiary of my, vomit today of displeasure. And so having people who are consistently supporting of you, and at least, and I'm not saying that they're on the sideline going, of course the world is terrible and you do everything perfectly. You don't want those type of people as well, but you do want people who at least can empathize first before they maybe go into diagnosing or prescribing a solution for you. So I would say, get help, acknowledge that you do need help, and that it's something that we all face. I mean, everybody has challenges that we're not meant to handle these things on our own.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah, I think definitely having a conversation with someone about how I'm feeling when I'm burnt out is step number one. That person, like you said, it can either be my husband, or it could be a coworker, or it could be my friend that I'm having lunch or a beer with or whatever. Just having the conversation for me is incredibly helpful. And I find that it's really helpful for students too. I see a lot of students in my office, and sometimes they just need somebody to sit and talk to about what is going on in their lives, whether it's school or whatever, or maybe they need to have a good cry, but just communicating that and getting that emotion out for them and for me allows me to start making a plan. Also, it's like, okay, I'm burnt out. I know that I'm burnt out. What are the things that are making me feel this way? What can I cut? What can I get rid of? What can I take off of my plate? What can I maybe delegate to someone else to give me more room to breathe? So communicating the problem and then trying to make some type of plan to help mitigate the problem.
And just picking up on one of the things that Ashley just mentioned is, having a plan and acknowledging that if you're going to make a change, it's going to affect other people. So, I think at the extreme, right? At the extreme, in my situation, if I just came home from work and I told my wife, hey, by the way, I quit my job. Like that's not just my decision. Like that affects us as well. And, even from a student perspective, if you just go and tell your parents like, oh yeah, I just dropped out of school, it was too much. That have effects on other people. Or even, in a smaller sense, if you just tell your group, I know we had this deadline, but things happen. So I had to take care of things and you guys just make up the slack. So being in communication with people and letting them know that, hey, I'm not trying to skirt responsibilities here, or I'm not trying to put you all in a bind, but I could use some consideration here. I could use some help. And I hope if it's time for me to return that favor, then I would do that as well.
Great.
Absolutely. It really sounds like both of you focus on identifying what you're feeling first before you can even start making that plan on what's going on. And whether that, I know personally that sometimes like a friend isn't always readily available. And sometimes that requires journaling out or taking the time and space to just identify what's going on can be really important.
Absolutely.
So I'm ready to move on to our next question. If you guys are there any pitfalls to be aware of when trying to work on alleviating burnout that could inhibit a healthy recovery? Complicated question there. So
I'll take a swing at this one first. Usually when I'm feeling burnt out, it is because I'm overwhelmed. I have too many things on my plate. I feel tired. I start to get that apathy creeping in. And alleviating burnout for me a lot of times is just rest. It's spending a day not doing work, reading a book, going on a hike, whatever I need to do. And in the back of my mind, when I do that, I'm just like, oh man, there's work piling up. There are things that I need to do. There's stuff going on, and it's going to be there when I get back. And I just have to tell myself, it's always going to be there. The work will always be there, but you have to rest. You have to make the time to rest so you can do that work effectively. But it's a constant like battle and struggle between the two things in my mind.
Well, and Sam, you mentioned perhaps in a positive light, both Ashley and I taking that perspective of taking a step back and kind of assessing how we're feeling. And so for me, who is a feeler, that can also be a downfall, right? If something happens and I get really frustrated with something, I can let my feelings dictate my actions. And, sometimes that's good, but other times, it's not so good. And, for you who, either have parents or you have siblings, I think this is something we kind of teach our children all the time, right? It's like, well, having that feeling is good. Hitting your sibling is perhaps not so good. So, same thing if like, for instance, yes, it might make you feel better if you let everyone know that they are putting you in a terrible situation and how in the world could they have made those decisions and how inconsiderate they are. And, just kind of righting the wrongs and letting everyone know that you are in this situation because everyone else has boxed you in. That might be productive in certain circumstances, but I would say for the most part, just maybe draft that email. Don't put anybody in the to line because you might accidentally hit a button there, but maybe just draft that email, maybe send it off to, we talked about having that support group. Maybe you send it off to that person and say, if I hit the send button, how do you think that would reflect? And so I would say, at least for me, for people like me, if you are somebody that tends to lead with your emotions, then it's always helpful too. That's why it's helpful to have that conversation with somebody else. And it's helpful just maybe take a pause and, have a plan, like Rita mentioned in the chat, like have a plan as opposed to just working off of your passion. At least, so that's my big thing that I always have to, and so, if I think about, I'm the kind of person, like, it's funny because my wife, her name is Karen. And so we always make fun of her being a Karen. But I'm more the Karen than she is. Like, I feel like if I have a bad customer service experience, it's like, I want to talk to your training manager. I want to see how the organization is set up. Like, how do you run this organization? Like, what is going on that led to you disrespecting me? And, sometimes it's just that person's a person and they're in front of me and they're trying to do their best and they don't need to hear how, my exposition on how organizations should be efficiently run. So anyway, I can be a little bit much. And sometimes when I get frustrated and burnout, that comes out.
Absolutely. It happens to the best of us. I would love to hear what pitfalls you identify when you're working on your burnout personally, Gerry. You might have that might be different than myself or Ashley.
Well, so I've always been a very physical person, meaning, I'm like the kind of person who will go out and go for a run if I'm feeling bad. Like, I kind of feel like me sitting down and just ruminating is never really productive for me. And so fortunately, like when I'm at home, I can just go into the next room. I've got some, workout equipment. I've got my yoga mat, so I can just kind of work things out through my body. Now, of course, if I'm in my car and somebody pulls in front of me, I can't quite do that. So the thing that really helps me is I have a number of different breathing techniques that I utilize. So for instance, it might be, using this like box breath, which if you're not familiar with it, you breathe in for a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you breathe out for a count of 4, and then you hold it for a count of 4, and you repeat that a couple of times. I have a number of those things. And so even if I can't quote unquote move, by bringing awareness to my breath, it brings attention to my body, and I can kind of try to identify exactly what's going on. Like, why am I getting so riled up here? And, I just kind of think about the thing that I tell my kids all the time. I'm like, you know what? So let's say I've got 2 boys, and, if one gets frustrated with the other, they're always like, well, he made me mad. I'm like, well, no, he didn't make you mad. Like, he did something and you're mad. And so I have to make sure I take the same advice myself. It's like, that person who cut me off didn't make me mad, even though they did, but they didn't really make me mad. Like, I'm choosing to kind of live in this anger right now. So I would say, like, that's the biggest thing, at least for me, is I have to do something to get out of my mind space and, kind of get my body in a good place.
Absolutely. It sounds like just different variations on what Dr. Cheyney said with rest, of just like taking that pause almost. Our next question is, how can we approach colleagues and friends experiencing burnout to help them? So let's say that we're not experiencing burnout, but we recognize it in perhaps our mentor or another student on rotation or just a peer in class.
I think a lot of times just approaching someone with empathy can be a really big help. At least when someone approaches me and I try to approach people in the same way, just say, hey, I noticed X, Y, or Z. And just the fact that you notice and you care enough to say something will mean a lot to them. And it might also be the only opportunity they get to open up to somebody about what's going on with them. So just creating an outlet for someone to communicate what's going on with them, I think can be really helpful and can be really important.
So not being afraid to take that first step and reach
out.
Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm an Enneagram 8. I don't know if there are Enneagram people on here, but I'm just like, I want to make things right and I want people to be okay. Like, justice is my thing. It's like, all right, are you okay? Do we need to do something about it? Can I take something off of your plate? Do I need to go have a conversation with someone? Like, I will go do that thing. So yeah, I'm definitely a take the first step kind of gal.
I love it.
And it's interesting because I'm sure Sam didn't plan it this way, but she has some opposites here. So I'm a 7, and
okay, yeah,
but
I'm a wing 7.
Okay, but yeah, when it comes, I have a pretty interesting approach to people, and I mean, not saying it's good or it's bad, but I'm very reluctant to try to help other people. Another to my relationship with them, right? So obviously, if my wife or my child or my brother, my sister, if they're experiencing something, I know them really, really well, right? I think I'm in their life for a reason, right? I think I am there to help them with certain things that they can't see on their own. But like, let's say, for instance, it's one of my students. It really, really depends on my relationship with that student, because I might see something that's not there, or I might miss something that I should see. So I guess if I'm answering the question here, how can we approach colleagues and help them with burnout? I guess my first recommendation is proceed with caution, because there's so many variables that are going into what's going on. So let's say we're using our examples that we had before. A student is maybe not contributing as much to a group project as before. I mean, maybe they're not burnt out. Maybe they are choosing to do that, or maybe they had some good news in their life and they're trying to take care of that instead of this project. So it could be a lot of things. But I mean, I do think at a certain point is important. It's letting people know you're there with empathy. So I guess the last thing I would say is, maybe a thing to not do in this situation is, offer solutions. Basically go to them and say, well, it seems like you're experiencing burnout, so I think you should try this, or I think you should do this. So even if it works for you, right? So like the things that I've shared that I do, I'm not going to go tell somebody, go do some yoga, you'll feel better, because that might not be what's going to work for them. So I think that the difference between empathy and sympathy, is important here, and letting people know that, hey, if you want someone to talk to, I'm here, but I'm not going to, tell you what I think you should do, because I'll really don't know what's going on.
I think that's totally right. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. And we're talking about approach, like literal approach, I think, is to approach someone with empathy and with open hands. Like, hey, how are you doing? Not, hey, what's wrong with you? Hey, whatever. It's like, hey, how are you doing? And you give someone the opportunity to engage with you. And I'm different. Like, I would do that to anyone. Like, I would, if someone looks sad or someone looks distraught and I have no idea who they are, be like, hey, are you okay? And they can either engage me or not engage me and pick it up or take it or leave it. But like, just giving it kind of open hands and letting someone engage and interact if they want to.
Yeah, I think something that also is really important to bring up at this point is that if you are going to open it up, you've got to be very flexible and ready for whatever that response is. Because
right.
they might come right back at you and be like, you're my problem. You are the problem in this situation. You have no idea.
That's happened.
I just approaching the situation with caution and just being ready, knowing where you are to be ready to help them is like really important.
Yeah. And one more thing, Sam, is, whether you agree with these specific numbers or even the concept is less important than the point I'm making, which is, so most communication scholars think that, like 7% of what's communicated is the actual words we say. And, 50-60% is through tone. And then the rest is, nonverbal. And so, there's a big portion there that's your tone. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of it depends on, I kind of go back to the relationship you have with somebody. So, I could go up to somebody, for instance, and be like, hey, like, how's it going? It's like, just the way that I phrase it, it might be because of the relationship I have with them. They would find it like, okay, we're going to have that kind of conversation. Let's go there. Whereas from another person, I might approach it saying the exact same thing. I might be much more somber, much more serious, and say, hey, how's it going? There's and trying to communicate your intention, like Ashley mentioned, with the approach. It's like you're able to communicate that not through just the words you're saying, but your tone as well, And so kind of matching your tone with your intention is pretty effective in order to make that initial approach.
Definitely. It's definitely an important part of communication that oftentimes we forget. It's not just the words we're saying, but everything else and how we're opening up and approaching the situation. So kind of switching gears, coming back to maybe more of a personal focus rather than our external peers. What strategies, what are strategies to prevent or curb burnout once you've noticed and identified it?
I'll go ahead and go.
I forget who went first in this last.
Yeah, I'm up for whatever. I really like Raina, one of the students in the chat, said she made a year-long plan and held herself accountable. I think prevention and curbing of burnout for me is having some type of structure, some type of plan. I really enjoy knowing, okay, here are the things I need to accomplish and having some kind of a timeline to help me accomplish that so I don't feel overwhelmed. It's like, okay, today I literally have my life scheduled on a Google Calendar. It's like, okay, today I have this and I'm going to do this. Yeah. Like I have these things that I need to do and I can check them off when I get them done. And it's like, okay, I did the things I need to do today. Now I can rest and I have more things to do tomorrow. So just having a schedule and not feeling rushed or overwhelmed, I think really helps me a lot.
So I thought about this question, before our session today, and I'm not a burnout expert, but from what I have read about burnout, it's often described as a systemic condition, meaning it's not necessarily that you can't handle what's going on. It's that the structure around you is not, at least for you, it's not to say it's not a good fit for somebody else, but for you and where you're at right now, it's maybe not the right fit. And so, this is a hard kind of recommendation, but, a strategy is you may have to consider removing yourself from that situation. And so, it might just be, I don't want to necessarily like throw around these concepts of toxic environments or whatever, but because again, I don't necessarily think that an environment is necessarily toxic, but it could be toxic to you. And so, life is pretty short. And, if you hope that your boss is going to change, if you hope that your entire department is going to see the light, it may be a losing battle. And so, I do think that a lot of, for instance, healthcare organizations are taking this issue on and they're saying, how can we, because we caused this issue, how can we address these types of issues? And even though, yes, I'm a big proponent of yoga and all these things, I don't think it's, putting a little relaxation room in the room. Not that that's a bad thing, but, if you're telling clinicians that they need to bill more hours, they need to do more documentation and then more documentation. And meanwhile, don't be stressed about it. It's like, well, I think you're going to have to figure out another way, because unless you change the things you're asking them to do, they're only going to get more burnt out. So, and I'm obviously not telling anybody what you should do or how you should approach your career, but I do think the reality is that, sometimes you just have to remove yourself from this situation that you're in for the life stage that you're in right now. And otherwise it can just be really, really hard it's almost like, you have to stop the pain first before you can heal. So that's a strategy is removal.
I want to piggyback off of that just a little bit. And I hear what you're saying 100% about removing yourself from the place that makes you feel burnt out. But I also feel like students have signed up to be in a place that makes them feel burnt out. Like school, the programs are intense, and you have to persevere and you have to find ways to keep yourself from going insane. So I think you've literally placed yourself in this place. So having the strategies to try to prevent burnout while you are in the toxic place before you get out, I think that's really important.
I mean, I think both of you guys are kind of alluding to having a boundary between what you are considering work or whatever is causing this burnout and what you need to do personally to alleviate the burnout.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's a really, really interesting point you make, Ashley, and it makes me think of, so, if you think of like a sports analogy, so, I'll use my son as an example. He plays basketball, and as a parent who has experienced a lot of different things in my life, my wife has experienced a lot of different things, sometimes he'll get to the point where he's like, oh, this is really, really hard. And, he kind of wants to remove himself. Like, maybe I don't want to go to practice today or whatever it is. And, we're kind of always, just providing that perspective of, sometimes you have to do really hard things. But what's really nice about once you get to like a certain level of sport is like, he has a coach, right? He has healthcare staff, like he has an athletic trainer. And so at a certain point, it's like, what's nice is that there's an external set of eyes, right? It's somebody else who's saying, hey, you can push yourself into a point where it's not healthy for you anymore. And so maybe you're going to injure yourself if you do this. So, it kind of goes back to what we said before, like even personally, when we're dealing with burnout, having somebody there we can talk to and who can kind of give us another set of eyes. I think if we're in a situation, so let's say, you're a student and we're asking you to do some really hard things. This is why we have, counseling services. This is why we have faculty advising. It's having somebody who's been through that process to help you, kind of find that balance of how hard are you pushing? Are you pushing past the point of you're going to hit burnout? Or, because that's the challenge. Like, we want you at that edge, right? We want you at that learning edge. Because if you're not pushing yourself, you're not learning. But if you're pushing too hard, it's going to, hinder your learning. So yeah, I go back to having a support system, having people who can help you find that equilibrium and recalibrate as you go along your journey.
I just want to remind students that it doesn't have to be a faculty or a staff at your college. It could be a student who's a semester ahead in your program or just recently graduated. They are very close to what you're going through and are definitely resources that even if you don't have an official mentorship program within your personal degree track, definitely someone to reach out with, because they were in your shoes maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, but they definitely can understand. You're not alone in it, essentially, is one of those strategies to remember, is that you do have a support system.
Absolutely.
All right. Which kind of leads in, as our last question, kind of leads in. So how can we set boundaries to help prevent burnout in work or rotation environments, whether that's a clinic setting or perhaps administrative or academia?
Okay, well, I guess it's my turn to go first. And OMG, what a question, right? So, I mean, I an hour ago, I was watching several videos about quiet quitting and quiet firing and just this whole quiet movement. And, so as I understand this phenomena, if you will, about quiet quitting, you have some people who and so if anybody's unfamiliar with quiet quitting, which I would be surprised, but it's just this concept of employees doing their job and not doing anything extra. And so on the one hand, you have people who, are saying, hey, that's not realistic. Like, jobs need people to go beyond, because if you don't go beyond the job, then you're not going to get a promotion, or you're not really contributing your best self to the work environment. And then you have people on the other side who are saying, hey, actually, this might be a way of setting healthy boundaries. And you're saying that I'm going to do the job that I've agreed to do. And if you want me to do more, you need to pay me more. You need to, support me more. You need to give me the resources to do that. And so, I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I personally fall along these lines of quiet quitting. And then, so if you're not familiar, there's like a new term now of quiet firing. So this is for a manager who's telling an employee, actually, I'm just going to let you do the job, and I'm not going to give you other opportunities. Now, some employees might see that as firing because you're not giving me these opportunities to advance and show my skills. And other employees might be like, thank you. Like, you're actually going to just let me do my job and go home? Excellent. So the thing that I think about when I think about this concept of quiet quitting or quiet firing is, and it's very tough. I recognize this is tough. But I think as much clarity as we can bring to these relationships, these expectations that we have in our careers, in our roles. So for instance, if you are a nurse and you're being asked yet again to cover for another nurse who called out sick, there's a point there where you want to have a conversation with whoever it is, whether it's your colleagues, whether it's your supervisor, whether it's someone in HR, somebody. So you have a conversation because you want to find this balance. You want to assert your needs while also recognizing that everyone else has needs as well, and that things don't revolve around you. But you are a valuable member of the team of society. So it really is a balance point. So if I set a boundary that's not compatible with the workplace, I mean, I have to recognize that that's not going to work for the workplace. On the other hand, if I can set an appropriate boundary and it does work, it's not in anyone's best interest for me not to. So these things are definitely like a case by case basis. But I'm a strong advocate of people feeling comfortable enough to be able to at least have those conversations. We say this all the time, right? It's like, what's the worst somebody could say? They could say no. And so if you go into your workplace and you say, hey, I need to know, like, I have family obligations, my daughter has a soccer game, whatever. So I need to be able to tell her whether or not I can make it. So if I can, I understand I need to cover for people occasionally, but if I could know with 24-hour notice or whatever it is, kind of set the parameters that work for you, I think people will actually respect that. And I think a lot of times people assume if you're not saying anything, then nothing's wrong. And so it's like, well, Ashley never told us that she needed to, that she had these needs. And so how are we supposed to know? So if she brings them up and we say that we accommodate them, then that involves a different conversation. But if she brings them up then we're all better for it.
Absolutely. I think something important to note in that is that your boundary for this 2-week stretch might be different than your boundary for the next 2-week stretch. And just having to communicate that with the team that you're working with, whether that is a team of nurses or with your students in a group project. I think that just having that open line of communication on what you are able to reach is important as well. Sorry to take your moment, but I just wanted to add in the flexibility part.
I just want to add just a few things in there. I like how you brought up quiet quitting because you also brought up like workplace culture and fitting into a workplace environment. And I feel like when employees feel valued, they will not quiet quit. They want to contribute. So being in the right culture helps kind of mitigate some of the quiet quitting. I also want to shout out to David because it absolutely isn't shameful to ask for help. Like going to student counseling services or even just talking to a friend, a colleague, talking to a professor about what you need. So critical, such a good skill to build if you already don't have that in your toolbox. And then setting boundaries. I think the hardest thing about setting boundaries is how to figure out what the heck those are. Like, where do I need to put these things? And I think just identifying, pinpointing, okay, this really bothers me. This is a place where I need to set a boundary. So taking the time to be introspective and figuring out, okay, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? I'm feeling this way because someone has called me in 5 times to work a shift. Okay, that's too much. That's a boundary for me. I will work shifts when they're absolutely necessary, but don't call me on the weekends. Don't call me whatever. But just like taking the time and the intention to find what those points are to set your boundaries.
Absolutely. And I think that it's just really important that what works for one person as a boundary might not work for you, or it might not work for the next person that you're trying to help set boundaries with. So it's going to be a case by case basis and even a person by person basis, which, I mean, we're all unique. So definitely something to consider. We've kind of already talked about some of the resources, and you've both mentioned students counseling services, which we have a slide with their information if you feel that you need to reach out to someone as we go into final season, which is coming up quicker than we all think it is, as it's November. But what resources can you guys think of, maybe perhaps in your own college or across the campus, that students can access while experiencing burnout? I think Dr.
Are you first this time, Ashley?
Sure. So outside of student counseling services, which I think is really important, I think student affairs can also be a really good resource for helping you maybe find avenues for tutoring or alternate ways to go about things if you're feeling overwhelmed at school. So your student affairs for your department or your college can be really helpful. The gym on campus is really, really great. There are fitness classes, there's a rock climbing wall. So just finding ways to burn off some of the stress. I agree with Gerry 100%. Like exercise is such a nice way to clear my head and get me focused again. So exercise also. And this is a side note. I just learned about this a couple of weeks ago. Maybe you see someone experiencing burnout. Maybe you see someone acting erratically and you don't know what to do, or you don't know where to go, or you don't necessarily want to talk to the person. There's a behavioral intervention team on campus that you can contact anonymously. So if someone is maybe saying some things that are maybe a little bit scary, or they're talking about hurting themselves, if they're very, very burned out, you can contact the behavioral intervention team and they will actually contact that person and put them in touch with resources that can help them.
That's a phenomenal resource for our students who, like you said, might not want to engage with a peer or colleague, but they still care and want to help. Thank you for bringing that up. I think I've heard of it, but it's definitely not something that is in my dossier when I think of helping someone with burnout. I should add it.
So I think about there was this really funny, I think it was on Instagram or something like that. It was like a little meme, and this one person, they post on there and they say, "Oh my gosh, my boss is like completely obsessed with me. They want me to come into work. I was literally just there yesterday." And so, it's like sometimes the expectations are developing, I would say. So, for instance, in our department, we set students up with alumni mentors. And so if you have that opportunity, whether it's formally through your department setting it up, or taking advantage of all these types of things, or different events that go on campus, go to the Unity Clinic and find another student and just develop a friendship with them. So I think the student body, the faculty body, like we are our best resource for each other. The other thing I thought about is, I was telling my wife that I'm going to be on this panel for burnout, and she goes, "Oh, are you like the case? Are you like the case study for burnout?" I said, "Oh, well, I guess so." And so the point I'm making there is, I have a lot of thoughts on burnout, and it's not because I'm an expert on burnout. It's because I deal with it a lot.
100%.
It's like I've had to develop strategies to deal with it because I experience it a lot. And so, this kind of incorporates a lot of the things that we've mentioned before, whether it's another student who just, graduated from the program or is a year ahead of you, whether it's a faculty member or a student counselor. There are people, I would say probably most people are either experiencing some kind of frustration or burnout, but we're handling it. We're dealing with it, right? we've developed some effective strategies. And by just talking to a number of different people, you can say, oh, I didn't even think about like getting a plant and taking care of it, but maybe that's something I can try. So, even though we talked earlier about, you got to find what works for you, part of that is finding what works for you. And so it might be just experimenting with different things. I have a friend who, they went and tried a boxing class for the first time, and now they're obsessed because it's a new way for them to, kind of get in touch with some different feelings that they didn't kind of really address beforehand. So again, I just return back to this concept of, tap into all the resources, whether they're formal or informal, and, recognize that everyone is struggling at some point with something, and we can all help one another. And then last thing I would say is even, just whether maybe not right when you're in the thick of it, you may not be the best resource for somebody else, but how can you help other people? How can you not just take this burden, quote unquote, that you have, but use it as a way of saying, okay, I made it through that thing. I can help other people make it through it as well.
Absolutely. And Emma in the chat says that she's actually used the service you were recommending on the Norman campus, but in case anyone was curious, they didn't have to do any follow-up, and it was incredibly useful for a peer that she had concerns with.
Perfect.
So, a live example right there. I think it's really important to remember when we're looking for resources is that we're not an island and you're not isolated, that there are so many events that are going on every day on this campus. If you forget what they are, the HSC sends out a daily email. Some of you might have routed it to your spam, but it still goes out. So this is kind of more of a personal note. Are there any good books, articles, podcasts, that you guys would recommend for students that do address burnout on a regular basis? And if you don't have any, that's okay too.
Well, I'll share. I mean, like I said, I'm not an expert on burnout. I don't really study it or research or anything like that. What I like to do a lot, if you're talking about like books or articles, I love to watch comedy. And so every now and then you'll hear somebody, they'll have like a bit about work, and it's just really funny to hear about other people's perspectives. And part of it really does put a perspective on you, right? If I'm thinking I'm having a bad day, they're talking about their boss who's yelling at them, or their work that they're doing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like at least it's almost like how we watch reality TV and we're like, well, gosh, like my life is not as bad as theirs. So, okay, it feels better now. So, I guess it's, if you had to put a label on it, it's like distraction therapy or whatever. So, sometimes when I feel frustrated, I want to do the opposite approach. And I need some levity. I need some humor. I'm just going to go watch like a YouTube, and just rant about something for 20 minutes. And it'll take my mind off of what's going on.
Absolutely.
I can't say that I have any specific books or podcasts, but while thinking about this question, it did occur to me, I listen to a ton of podcasts, anything from tech and business to education policy to politics to really anything in between. And one thing I found over the last couple of months is every single one of these podcasts from these different realms are all talking about burnout. So it's not necessarily a resource for burnout, but a lot of people in a lot of different places are having these conversations. And I think it's really hopeful. And it's nice that people are taking the time to address burnout, and it's becoming something that is just a conversation. So we're talking about it, we're becoming more aware. And I think that that's helpful for everybody involved.
That we're reducing that taboo on the subject, that
absolutely
someone's not just going upstate because they hit their breaking point, right, for lack of a better analogy. But
right.
I also do recommend that you just kind of, personally with podcasts, I have to try them multiple times before I like really have decided that I like any of them. But almost every university has put out, or quite a number of universities have put out, healthcare related burnout, if that is something that you feel that you're struggling with once you hit rotations. So just like a quick Google search isn't a bad thing at this point. So at this point, quick shout out to Student Counseling Services. We have their phone number, they have their email. They are in the student union. I would reach out to them now if you are starting to feel any of the things we've discussed today, because you don't want to be in the middle of dead week or your finals week or delivering that last defense of your thesis before you recognize the signs. And there is absolutely no shame in asking for help, as David has said. I do invite everyone, before we open it up for Q&A, to take the evaluation and attendance QR code. And I will leave the screen up as we go into our Q&A. So if you are comfortable turning on your mic and asking a question, you are more than welcome to. Otherwise, drop it in the chat. And Sarah is also dropping links if QR is not your particular format you like.
Perhaps it's a very calm group that we're speaking with.
Definitely. Well, you guys definitely covered a lot of the highlights, I think, that there is when we talk about burnout. It's definitely something to remind yourself to give back to your friends and your peers whenever you are in a better place. Definitely something that really resonated with me when you said that.
Okay, I have a question. I don't know if it's a question or anything, but there have been situations where you kind of pick up habits because you're so burned out. You find a way to deal with it, and then you pick up habits that you realize are also not the very best. Right? I realize I eat a lot when I'm stressed out, and I've been super stressed recently, like really, really stressed out. And so I don't know. I don't think I have a question in there, but do you have anything to say about that? Because sometimes you don't even know you're doing it. I recently realized, ooh, it hit me like I've been eating really too much. And it's because I'm stressed. I get home and, I'm so stressed. And then I just eat and try to sleep just to get away from the stress that I'm feeling. Like, do you have any comment on that? I don't know. I feel like it's a bad habit, but I also don't know what to do with it.
I think you did the big work, Gertrude, of recognizing it. So you're like, okay, here we are. I'm doing this thing. I'm noticing that it's a pattern. I have the same pattern. And one of the things that I do to try to help combat that, if I think it's an issue, is to just ask myself, like do a check-in and be like, okay, how are you feeling? And are you actually hungry? Are you hungry or are you just eating because you're stressed out? So again, just like some introspection. And if you're like, no, I just want a snack, have a snack. And if you're like, no, I'm eating because I'm stressed, then maybe that's worth a little bit of more investigation and maybe asking some more questions.
So in the chat, we have a question. Can you guys share any advice for significant others of medical professionals who face burnout? How can they best support them, especially significant others who are non-healthcare related? And maybe this is a phone friend and we'll get back to you, but
yeah. Actually, no, I'll address this one. So a little bit of a different context. So my wife is not in the medical profession, but she has a job that's similar in terms of she has an inconsistent schedule. Sometimes she, has to meet with somebody last minute. Like it's just that we can't plan our schedule, like our family schedule, around her schedule because it's so inconsistent. Even, something like, are we going to see my family for Christmas? She's like, I don't know. Ask me in like 2 weeks. Like, I don't have my schedule. It's like, okay. And so at least what I try to do to support her and kind of her really intense job and, not a regular 9 to 5, is, it goes back to a lot of things we talked about. Is I don't want to just say, well, you have this difficult job, let's cater everything around that, and then we'll get all the scraps. But it's also not, hey, why don't you have a regular job to make it easier for me and the kids. So, just having a lot of understanding. So the way I like to approach it with her is saying, hey, this was a decision we both made, right? This wasn't you've decided to do this career. If it's a significant other, that means it's a significant relationship, right? And so I believe that in these significant relationships, our careers are not our own thing. They are, they involve both of us. And so, for instance, if my wife is doing something and it's causing a little bit of challenge with scheduling something, it's never, hey, why did you decide to do this? This is no, we talked about this. We knew going into it that we were going to have these challenges. So when they happen, I can't blame it on her schedule. This is what we both signed up for. So, and at the same time, I also don't want to think that, well, she can just use that as an excuse for other things that are happening as well. So it's like, okay, in order for me to work effectively in our relationship, I need you to fulfill your, your promises, and I will fulfill my promises on my side. But I would say the biggest thing is, just to recognize that if you're in this thing together, then have those conversations about, because things might change, right? It might change to, now it's switched to the other side, and the other significant other now is in a different life space or career space. And I think they'll remember that, and they'll remember that you didn't kind of point back to them and say, hey, you're making life difficult, and why are you doing this? That's part of being in these types of careers that we've chosen.
I would also recommend that if the significant other is unable to relate to them, to encourage them to go to one of their friends that does deal with healthcare. If it's like they're struggling with a particularly hard patient death or something like that, someone who has that shared experience, and just honoring the fact that you are that person for another, like you are that person for your significant other, but there might be someone else who's better equipped to handle them in that moment or in that particular complex emotion. My 2 cents on that. I think that we have come to the end of our time here tonight. So thank you everyone for attending our interdisciplinary grand rounds for November. And as we said at the beginning, this has been recorded. So if you feel like this is a resource that perhaps your friend didn't make it to, we will have it up on the the Interdisciplinary Student Council website here with once we get our transcription done of the meeting. So again, thank you all for participating, and thank you to our 2 panelists for coming out on a Tuesday evening in November. I greatly appreciate it.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Sam and Sophia. This has been great.